I didn't even make it past the front walkway before it happened the first time out at first. I thought my ears were playing tricks on me, the way they sometimes do when you're half awake and the day hasn't settled into focus yet. It was early morning, pale sunlight spilling over the tops of houses, and the air was sharp with that cool, almost metallic smell of dawn. I'd barely closed my front door when I heard them footsteps. Soft, deliberate, too close. They weren't hurried, like someone jogging to catch up. They weren't casual either. They had a certain measured quality, as if each step was being placed exactly where mine had landed seconds before. I froze mid-stride, waiting for the bump of a shoulder or the rush of air as someone passed me. Nothing. I turned my head, expecting to see a neighbor, maybe Mrs. Ellis walking her little pug, or the kid from 2 houses down heading to school. But the street was empty, silent. The wind rattled the leaves in the big oak by the curb. A dog barked somewhere far away, but behind me, nothing but still air. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding, forced a laugh under my breath. Maybe the houses along the block were bouncing sounds strangely. Maybe it was the crunch of my own shoes on the uneven pavement. I told myself I was just tired. But when I kept walking, they came again. This time I knew they weren't mine. It's hard to explain how I could tell. My steps had their own rhythm, a natural pace. The ones behind me were matching, yes, but just enough out of sync to make the skin along my neck prickle. I sped. Up a little, they sped up too. Every time I stopped, so did they just a fraction of a second later. By the third stop, my hands were shaking. I tested it. Without looking over my shoulder, I veered sharply off the sidewalk onto the narrow strip of grass between the pavement and the curb. My shoes gave a muffled thud. Behind me, the concrete echo of the other steps faltered, then shifted to match. My new path, softer now, as if whoever it was had followed me exactly. Something cold uncoiled in my stomach. My eyes swept the row of houses, each one closed off, blinds drawn, no cars passing. No one in their yards, no sound except those damn footsteps. I made it to the corner, my heartbeat loud enough in my ears to drown out the morning birds. I spun around so fast my shoes scraped against the curb. Empty street. I stared at the stretch of sidewalk behind me, my gaze tracing every crack, every patch of grass, the long shadow of the oak tree stretching across it. If someone had been there, they were gone, completely gone. I started to tell myself I'd imagined it until I heard them again, not behind me this time. Around me, faint, slow, deliberate like someone pacing in a circle. The hairs along my arms lifted. I ran, my sneakers slapped against the pavement, my breath tearing through. My throat, the footsteps stayed with me for a few strides, then faded. I didn't look back, not once. When I reached my porch, I fumbled with my keys so badly I nearly dropped them. The moment the lock turned, I shoved the door open, stumbled inside, and slammed it shut behind me. The silence that followed was worse than the footsteps. Because in that silence I could still feel them, I stayed pressed against the door for a long time after locking it, my forehead resting against the cool wood. My breathing came in shallow bursts, every exhale sounding too loud in the unnatural stillness of the house. For a moment, I told myself I'd left it outside, that whatever I'd heard, whatever had followed me was still out there on the empty street. But then I realized something. The house sounded wrong. Usually when I came home, there was a certain hum of normalcy. The refrigerator's steady whir, the faint ticking of the old wall clock, the muffled groan of wood settling. But now those sounds felt amplified, sharper, as though the air itself had shifted to carry every noise straight to my ears. I turned the deadbolt with a slow, deliberate click and flicked on the entry light. The warm glow felt reassuring for half a second until I noticed the shadows. They seemed darker than they should be, stretching longer, curling into corners they didn't usually reach. My shoes felt too loud as I crossed into the living room. The blinds were still shut. From the night before, keeping the space dim, I dropped my keys on the coffee table with a metallic clatter and sat down heavily on the couch, rubbing my temples. I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe the footsteps had been some echo, a weird trick of acoustics. My street was narrow, houses pressed close together. It was possible, plausible even, but my gut didn't buy it. The air in the house felt heavier, colder. Not cold like a draft cold, like something was drawing the warmth out of the room. And then I heard it, a faint, deliberate thump. I froze. My eyes darted toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. It could have been the floor settling, I thought. Houses make noises. But my skin prickled and my hands tightened into fists. Another thump, closer. My mouth went dry. Hello? My voice was too soft, and the quiet that followed swallowed it whole. And then came the sound, so subtle I almost missed it. Footsteps. Inside. Slow. Steady. Moving toward me. I grabbed. The first thing I could find, a heavy glass paperweight from the coffee table, and rose from the couch. Every muscle in my body tense. Who's there? The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. The hallway stretched ahead of me like a tunnel, the shadows inside shifting, almost alive. I took a cautious step forward, paperweight raised. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, my grip slick with sweat. That's when I heard the voice. It wasn't loud, didn't need to be. Low, rasping, almost intimate, as though it was whispering right against my skin. You can't run from me. My knees nearly buckled. The words felt heavy, each one sinking deep into my chest. The voice was unfamiliar, yet there was something disturbingly personal about it, like it had been waiting to speak to me for a long time. Who are you? I managed to choke out silence. I inched forward, the paperweight trembling in my grip. The air in the hallway felt colder, heavier, like walking into deep water. From the corner of my vision, something moved. It was quick, just a flicker of darker shadow slipping from one side of the hallway to the other. But I saw it. The footsteps started again, louder this time. Not just from the hallway, everywhere. Around me, behind me, above me. I spun in place, my chest heaving, eyes scanning every corner. But the room stayed stubbornly empty. Then the voice came again, closer. You? Let me follow you. My stomach lurched. I stumbled backward into the living room, gripping the paperweight so hard my knuckles ached. The footsteps followed, echoing from every corner, closing in, and then nothing. The footsteps stopped. The voice was gone. The cold faded, leaving. The air heavy but still. For a moment I thought it was over. Until I heard one single step, right behind me. I didn't turn around, I couldn't. My body locked in place, my breath shallow, as if any movement might give the thing permission to touch me. The step I'd heard, slow, deliberate still, reverberated in my mind. My heartbeat was loud enough that I almost didn't notice the quiet that followed, the kind of stillness that feels heavier than sound. I forced myself to breathe, counting each inhale and exhale like it might anchor me. Finally, with a slow, trembling motion, I turned my head just enough to see over my shoulder. There was nothing. The space behind me was empty, just my living room dimly lit by the single lamp I'd switched on earlier. The couch was there, the coffee table, the paperweight lying on its side where I must have dropped it in my panic. Nothing out of place, nothing strange, except for the air. It was wrong, charged like the air before a lightning strike. My skin prickled as if the atmosphere itself was aware of me, watching me. I told myself to sit down, to breathe, to call. Someone, anyone, had explained that I had some kind of episode, that I'd been tired, stressed, imagining sounds that weren't there, that maybe I'd read too many creepy stories online. But I didn't move toward my phone. My instincts were screaming that if I looked away, if I let my guard down, the footsteps would start again. I stood there for what felt like hours, my muscles aching from tension, until the lamplight flickered. Just once, barely noticeable, but enough. That was when I decided to try the door. My hand was halfway to the deadbolt when I remembered the morning, the street, the way the footsteps had followed me outside. Going out now would only put me back in their territory. The thought made my stomach turn. I stayed inside. The rest of the evening crawled by in strange, distorted chunks. I found myself checking over my shoulder constantly, convinced something was just about to appear in the corner of my vision. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the house settling made my pulse spike. At some point, I moved to the kitchen. I don't even remember deciding to. My hands gripped the edge of the counter while I stared at the sink. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, and then I heard it again. Footsteps. This time, they were faint, almost delicate, coming from the hallway that led toward the back door. They moved slowly, unhurried, as if the thing knew it had nowhere else to be. I froze. My mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe I'd left the TV on, maybe it was a neighbor's house. Maybe the sound stopped. The silence pressed in again, heavier than before. I turned my head toward the hallway. Darkness pooled there, thick and impenetrable. A part of me wanted to step forward, to see for myself that nothing was there. But a deeper, older part, the primal instinct that whispers warnings you don't want to hear, kept me rooted in place. That's when the voice came. It was low, rasping, and too close. "You can't leave me." The words slid through me, like ice water. My hands tightened on the counter until my nails dug into the wood. "Who?" My voice cracked. I swallowed hard and tried again. "Who are you?" No answer. But the darkness at the end of the hall seemed to breathe. I stepped back, my knees threatening to give way. The air in the kitchen felt colder now, my breath coming in faint white clouds. And then I saw movement, not a shape, not exactly. More like a distortion, a subtle shifting of the dark, as though something large had leaned just slightly forward. I couldn't move, couldn't think. Every nerve in my body screamed to run, but my legs stayed locked. The footsteps started again, now louder, echoing faintly from more than one direction behind me. To the side, up the stairs, I hadn't even touched in hours. I spun, scanning the room, but there was still nothing visible. The voice came again, closer, almost inside my ear this time. "You let me follow you." My breath hitched. The footsteps grew quicker, surrounding me now, until they were so close. I could almost feel the vibration in the floor. My skin burned with cold, my vision tunneling. I bolted. I don't even remember making the decision to move. 1 second I was in the kitchen. The next I was stumbling into the living room, clutching the back of the couch as if it could shield me. And just as suddenly as they had begun, the footsteps stopped. The air slowly warmed. The silence returned. But I didn't feel relieved, because I knew without a single doubt that whatever had followed me outside was now here, inside, and it wasn't leaving. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening for the sound I knew would come. Every few minutes, the house creaked in ways it never had before, soft pops in the walls, faint groans in the floorboards, as though the building itself was reacting to something unseen moving inside it. When the footsteps finally returned, they didn't bother with subtlety. They started in the hallway, slow and heavy, then made their way to my bedroom door. The rhythm was deliberate, 3 steps, pause, 2 steps, pause, like it was counting its way toward me. I didn't breathe, didn't move. When they stopped just outside the door, the silence was worse than the sound. I waited for the whisper, for the voice to press cold words into my ear, but there was nothing. Just the kind of stillness that makes you realize you can hear your own heartbeat. At some point, my eyes must have closed. Not sleep, more like the body shutting down for a moment under too much tension. When I opened them again, pale light was leaking through the blinds. Morning. The house was silent. It would have been easy to tell myself I dreamt it, that the entire night had been a loop of waking nightmares. But I couldn't shake the memory of how close the footsteps had been. I decided I needed to know if it had limits. I spent the morning preparing, though I didn't want to admit that's what I was doing. I told myself I was just cleaning, just making coffee, just straightening up. But my eyes kept darting to the front door. At noon, I took a deep breath and opened it. The street lay before me, quiet and empty, washed in the flat, cloud-filtered light of midday. I stepped outside. Nothing. 2 more steps down the walkway. Still nothing. Then, soft as a sigh, they began again. Footsteps perfectly timed here. Mine just a few paces behind. I kept moving, forcing my pace to change slower, faster, stopping abruptly. Each time, the other steps followed suit with uncanny precision. Halfway down the block, I spun around. Empty sidewalk. Show yourself. My voice cracked on the last word. A faint gust rattled the leaves in the trees. A curtain shifted in a nearby window, but I saw no one. I tried something different. I stepped off the sidewalk into a neighbor's yard, my shoes sinking slightly into damp grass. The footsteps followed, the sound changing from the scrape of pavement to the faint crush of blades beneath weight. It was here. I walked another block, my chest tightening. The footsteps never faltered, never lagged, always exactly where they would be if an invisible person were matching my every move. At the corner, I stopped. Why me? I asked. The answer came so softly I almost thought I'd imagined it. You heard me? The words burrowed under my skin. I turned and walked back toward my house, faster this time. The footsteps kept pace steady and patient. When I reached my porch, they stopped. Inside, I closed and locked the door, my mind racing. The voice had confirmed it. It knew me, or thought it did, and that meant this wasn't random. I needed proof. That evening, I set up my phone in the living room, camera pointed at the hallway. I left the lights dim, enough for shadows to collect, but not overwhelm the frame. Then I left the house. I took the long way around the block, letting the footsteps follow. By the time I returned 20 minutes later, my pulse was a constant. My ears. I played the recording immediately. At first, it was just stillness and empty frame, faint, ambient hum from the fridge. Then, around the 5-minute mark, something moved. Shadows in the hallway shifted. Not like light flickering, but like something tall and thin had crossed. In front of the camera, I leaned closer, my stomach twisting. The shape didn't have detail, no face, no edges, but it was there. For 2 frames, it seemed to linger, tilting slightly, before gliding out of sight. And then, the sound. Footsteps. Not loud, but distinct. Crossing from the hallway into the living room, right up to where the camera was sitting, the screen went black, not a fade, not static, just black. I was still staring at the frozen darkness when the footsteps began again, this time not on the video. Behind me, I turned so fast the phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. The living room was empty. But the air was cold enough that I could see my breath. The night outside seemed heavier than the ones before, as if the darkness itself had weight, pressing against the thin glass of my windows. Every shadow in the room felt wrong, stretched too long, bending in directions the light shouldn't have allowed. My breathing was the only sound I could trust, though even that came out shallow, uneven. I'd been pacing for over an hour, unable to settle. The marks on the wall had spread again, subtle but undeniable. What had once been a faint, childlike scrawl now formed something closer to shapes. And those shapes were starting to look like letters. I didn't want to understand what they said, but I knew eventually I would. My phone was useless. The signal had vanished sometime after sunset, the way it always seemed to when things got bad here. I had tried calling a friend earlier, my fingers trembling as I typed the number, but the call had cut out before the first ring. Now it just gave that dead, hollow silence before dropping entirely. I tried turning on the television for background noise, but the static that filled the screen felt worse than the silence. There was no normal programming, only that gray, flickering snow with occasional bursts of movement. At one point I swore I saw a shadow pass in front of the static, as though something were inside it. I turned it off before it could happen again. The air in the house was cold enough to sting my skin, despite the heater running. I wrapped myself in a blanket and sat on the couch, telling myself I just needed to stay awake until morning. Morning meant safety. Morning meant proof that I'd survived another night. But at 1:14 a.m., the voice returned. It started faint, like a whisper from the far end of a long hallway. My name dragged out in a tone that was almost curious. It was higher pitched than before, the sound of a child who didn't know whether to giggle or cry. Come play. The words were too clear this time, cutting through the air like they were being spoken directly into my ear. I froze, my pulse slamming in my throat. I didn't answer. I wouldn't answer, but my eyes drifted toward the corner where the sound had come from. There was nothing there. Just the wall with its smeared black markings, which now looked darker than ink. Then another whisper. Don't look away. I don't know why I obeyed. My eyes locked on that corner, my heart hammering, and the longer I stared, the more wrong it felt. The shadows didn't just sit still, they shifted, barely perceptible, like a slow, deliberate sway. And from within them, something pale began to emerge. At first, it was only a small hand. A child's hand. It slid out from the shadow, fingers curling and uncurling in a beckoning motion. The skin looked cold, almost translucent, the nails too long and slightly curved. I told myself it wasn't real, just my exhausted brain twisting the dark into shapes, but then the hand gripped the edge of the wall and something else began to pull through. I couldn't scream. My voice was locked somewhere deep inside me, trapped under layers of disbelief and terror. The blanket around my shoulders felt suffocating now, but I didn't dare move. The rest of the figure didn't come out. Instead, the hand retreated back into the shadow with a slow, jerking motion, like it was being pulled from behind. And then the voice came again, softer this time, almost sing-song. Soon. That single word broke my paralysis. I lunged for the nearest lamp, flooding the room with warm light. The shadows leapt backward instantly, receding into their natural shapes, and the corner was empty again. The marks on the wall looked different under the light, more like stains than writing, but my mind was already clawing for excuses. I didn't sleep that night. I sat upright on the couch, every light in the house blazing, until dawn finally broke. When the sunlight touched the wall, I saw something new. The stains weren't stains anymore. They were letters. And this time, I could read them. They spelled one word scrawled in uneven, jagged lines. Tonight, the world beyond the cabin door was a black void. No moonlight, no stars. Just a yawning darkness that seemed to swallow the porch whole. I didn't want to step outside, but the voice had grown insistent. Please, I'm cold. You promised. Promised what? My mind reeled. I didn't remember making any promise. Yet when I closed my eyes, I saw a memory that wasn't me, kneeling in the snow, whispering, I'll bring you back. The lamp in my hand flickered. I gripped the handle tighter and stepped onto the porch. The boards groaned under my weight. Every sound seemed amplified, the crunch of my boots, the low moan of the wind weaving through the pines. Somewhere. There, the voice was waiting. I called out, Where are you? It answered immediately, closer than I expected. Here. I turned toward the sound, my breath catching. There, at the edge of the tree line, something shifted. Not a person, not exactly. The shape was wrong, too thin in places, too long in others, as if it had been stretched. Its head cocked to one side, and I realized it was mimicking me. Every tilt, every breath, every movement, a beat behind. Come closer, it said, but the words didn't sound like speech anymore. They were the crunch of snow, the creak of wood, the rattle of a loose shutter. It was speaking in the sounds of the night itself. I stumbled backward onto the porch, my hand finding the doorframe. The thing stepped forward, and with each step, its features became sharper, more familiar. My own eyes stared back at me. My own mouth. My own voice said, Let me in. I'm cold. I slammed the door and threw the deadbolt. My heart was pounding. So hard, I thought my ribs would crack. The sound of footsteps circled the cabin. Slow, deliberate. Every few seconds, it tapped on the wall. Tap, tap, tap. Always 3 times. It stopped at the window beside the couch. I didn't dare look, but I could see its reflection in the dark glass. My own face, smiling 2-eyed. Its mouth moved without sound, then pressed against the pane. Frost spread in its wake, spider webbing across the glass. The whisper came again, softer this time. I'm not outside anymore. I spun. The cabin was empty, or it looked empty. But the air had changed thick and heavy, the way it feels, right before a storm. The shadows in the corners seemed to quiver. I backed toward the kitchen, grabbing the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a cast iron skillet from the stove. Something moved in the hallway. Just a flicker, a shift in the dark. Then footsteps, impossibly slow, one after another. They sounded wrong, as if the weight was in the wrong place, heel and toe reversed. I raised the skillet, my arms trembling. Stay back. A figure stepped into the dim light and my stomach turned. It was me, same jacket, same hair, same terrified expression, except its eyes were solid black, bottomless, reflecting nothing. It smiled, and in my own voice it said, "You never should have opened the door." The lamp flickered once, then died. Everything after that was sound, the skillet clanging to the floor. The rush of air as something moved too quickly toward me, the sensation of falling without ever hitting the ground. When I opened my eyes again, it was daylight. The cabin door was ajar. Snow drifted in across the threshold. My footprints were gone, replaced by a single set of prints leading away into the trees. They weren't mine, and they were still fresh. It was almost midnight when I heard the first knock, not a polite tap. Not a friendly rap, but 3 slow, deliberate knocks that seemed to shudder through the wood of my front door. I froze in the living room, half expecting the sound to be some trick of the wind or a loose branch against the siding. But the night outside was calm, eerily calm. The streetlight across the road burned with a pale orange glow, casting long shadows across the yard. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a package delivery at the wrong address, even though it was far too late for that. My hands itched toward the remote, trying to distract myself with whatever late-night rerun happened to be playing. But my ears strained toward the sound of movement outside. Then came the second knock, slower, harder, as if the visitor knew I hadn't answered and wasn't going anywhere. A chill crawled down my spine. No one ever visited me this late, not even friends. And this wasn't the kind of neighborhood where people stopped by unannounced. My nearest neighbor was a retired couple who went to bed before 10. I forced myself to move toward the door, each step cautious, my socked feet silent on the hardwood. My fingers brushed against the cold. Metal of the doorknob. Who is it? My voice came out more strained than I'd intended. A pause. Then a voice replied, low, shaky, but unmistakably familiar. It's, from the future. I jerked back from the door, my heart slamming against my ribs. The voice wasn't just familiar, it was mine. I don't know how long I stood. There, my breath caught in my throat. The words didn't make sense. They couldn't. Finally, I managed, "This isn't funny." I know, I wouldn't believe it either. The voice sounded strained, almost desperate. "But you need to let me in, now." Everything in me screamed not to. I had seen enough late-night horror movies to know that opening the door to something, claiming to be you, was a bad idea. But there was something else underneath the fear, a strange, gnawing curiosity. "What do you want?" I asked. "To warn you. There's something you need to do tonight, or it's going to happen again." "Again?" The voice hesitated, then almost a whisper. I can't go through it again." I swallowed hard, my hand tightening around the doorknob. I told myself to just call the police, but for some reason, I didn't move toward my phone. The thought felt wrong. Something inside me, a pull I couldn't explain, wanted to know what this person, this version of me, had to say. But my fears still held me in place. "How do I know you're really me?" I demanded, a sharp breath on the other side of the door. "You have a small scar on your left hand, near the base of your thumb. You got it in the 7th grade, cutting open a box with your dad's pocket knife." My throat tightened. "That scar wasn't visible unless you were looking closely." The voice continued, quieter now, almost trembling. "And you still have the letter from Claire. The one you never sent a reply to." I stepped back, my pulse hammering. That letter was hidden in my desk drawer, folded and creased from being read too many times. No one knew about it. No one except me. I don't have much time, the voice urged. You need to open the door, please. My hand hovered over the lock, and then I heard something else. A faint scrape, like nails or fingers dragging lightly against the wood of the door. It didn't sound like my hand. I took a step back. What's making that noise? The voice hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for dread to pool in my stomach. It's not important, not right now. But I wasn't so sure. The next day should have been ordinary. I tried to treat it that way, coffee brewing in the kitchen. The faint, pleasant smell of toast, my phone buzzing with notifications I ignored. But beneath it all was that same pressure in the air I'd felt last night. Like the weight of the house itself had shifted somehow. I kept telling myself that exhaustion was the real culprit. I'd been running on too little sleep and too much caffeine for weeks, so it made sense that my brain was inventing things. But still, I didn't imagine the way my cat, Milo, had hissed at the empty corner of the living room. I didn't imagine the sound of that faint, dragging whisper in the hallway. The memory pressed against me all morning. By noon, I decided I needed to distract myself. I tackled the mountain of boxes still stacked in the guest room, my procrastination zone. I ripped them open one by one, sorting books, winter clothes, and framed photos I hadn't looked at in years. Dust floated lazily in the sunlight, filtering through the blinds. I was halfway through unpacking when I found something odd. A small cardboard box, heavier than it looked, tucked behind a suitcase. It had no label. The top was sealed with brittle yellow tape, the kind that comes apart in flakes when you peel it. I didn't remember packing this. When I opened it, the smell hit first. Old paper, stale wood, and something else. Metallic faints, like rust. Inside were 3 objects. A cracked porcelain figurine of a child holding a balloon. Its face was faded, the eyes almost rubbed away. A leather-bound notebook, edges warped with age, and a tiny brass key. The figurine unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. It felt like it was watching, even without painted eyes. I set it aside and flipped open the notebook. Most of the pages were blank, but here and there were faint. Scrawled notes written in jagged handwriting I didn't recognize. Don't open the door at night, thought it comes when you forget to check the lock. The house doesn't like strangers. I shut it quickly, my hand suddenly cold. I told myself it was probably a weird old journal left by the previous owner. Someone eccentric who liked to write cryptic nonsense. The key I pocketed without thinking, though I had no idea what it might open. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly, too quietly. It wasn't until night fell that things began to feel wrong again. I'd just settled on the couch with Milo curled beside me when the house gave a deep, groaning sound, like wood being bent. It was followed by a faint series of taps 3, in slow rhythm coming from somewhere upstairs. Milo's head shot up. His eyes went wide, pupils dilating. Without warning, he leapt off the couch and bolted toward the bedroom, disappearing under the bed. I sat frozen for a moment before standing, every step toward the stairs making the floor creak in protest. The tapping stopped. I waited, listening. But all I could hear was my own breathing. Still, I went upstairs. The hallway was dim, lit only by the spill of light from the bathroom door I'd left ajar earlier. I walked slowly, my socks making barely any sound. When I reached the end of the hall, I noticed something strange. The door to the guest room, where I'd unpacked earlier, was wide open. I was certain I'd left it closed. Inside, everything looked normal at first glance. Boxes still half unpacked. The figurine still sitting where I'd left it. But the journal was gone. I stepped fully into the room, scanning the floor in case I dropped it. No sign of it. The shadows in the corners seemed thicker somehow, the air stale and unmoving. Then, from behind me, I heard it again. 3 slow taps. Only this time, they were coming from inside the closet. The air in the room turned icy. I could feel the fine hairs on my arms stand up. My mind was a storm of conflicting urges: open it and see, or leave and pretend nothing happened. I chose the latter. I stepped back, careful not to make a sound, and shut the guest room door firmly. My heart didn't slow down until I was back downstairs with every light in the living room switched on. That's when I realized something. The brass key in my pocket felt warm, almost hot against my leg. And somewhere upstairs, faint but deliberate, I could hear the sound of the closet door hinges creaking open. The rest of the evening was a blur. I stayed in the living room far longer than I needed to, keeping my eyes on the hallway that led to my bedroom. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the old pipes made my shoulders tense. My phone was in my hand the whole time, but my thumb hovered uselessly over the screen. Who was I supposed to call? The police. And say what? I think I might have left a voicemail to myself from inside my locked house. At some point, exhaustion caught up to me. I turned off the TV and locked my bedroom door, an act I'd never felt the need to do before. The lock's tiny click echoed far, too loudly. I got into bed and pulled the blanket to my chin, trying not to think about how fragile that little lock really was. Sleep came in fits. I'd drift off only to jerk awake moments later, sure I'd heard the sound of someone breathing in the room with me. Each time I told myself it was just my own breathing echoing in my ears. But then, a little after 3 a.m., I heard it faint, muffled, and unmistakable. A voice. It was low, almost whispering, and I couldn't make out the words. My whole body locked up. The sound seemed to be coming from beyond the bedroom door. I strained to hear. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might drown out the noise, but then I caught a few words. Not yet. The whisper was gone before I could be sure I'd heard it right. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat in bed, phone in hand, the blanket pulled around me like armor, staring at the door. When morning light finally crept through the blinds, it felt like I'd survived something, though I had no proof anything had really happened at all. I made myself a cup of coffee and tried to pretend it had all been a dream. But as I sipped, I remembered something. The phone. The logical part of my brain told me I was being ridiculous, but I couldn't stop myself. I opened my voicemail app. There was a new message. It was from my number. I hesitated for a long time before pressing play. The recording was short, no more than 15 seconds, but every second made my blood turn to ice. It was me, my voice, breathing hard, almost panting. Then, in a tone so low it was almost a growl, I'm closer tonight. That was it. Number, background noise, no indication of where or when it had been recorded. I deleted the message instantly. Then I emptied the trash folder, but I couldn't delete the sound from my head. For the rest of the day, I kept glancing over my shoulder. Every shadow looked like it might hold a figure. Every sound made me flinch. By evening, I'd made up my mind I was going to stay at a friend's place for the night, maybe 2. I packed a small bag, grabbed my keys, and opened the front door. Something fell to the floor. There was a single Polaroid photo. I picked it up with trembling hands. The picture was of me, sleeping. The rest of the night passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the image from my mind, the small, pale face peeking around the corner, eyes glistening in the faint light. It didn't matter how much I told myself it could have been a trick of the shadows. The memory felt too sharp, too solid to dismiss. When morning came, I found myself lingering in bed, reluctant to step into the hallway. The house felt different in daylight. There was still something about its silence that made my skin prickle. I eventually forced myself up, telling myself I was being ridiculous, and went to the kitchen to make coffee. Halfway through pouring water into the coffee maker, I heard it again, laughter. Only this time, it wasn't faint or far away. It was close, very close. I froze, the kettle still in my hand, listening. The sound drifted from the living room, light and playful, the kind of laugh you might hear from a child chasing bubbles in a park. But it was wrong. It was just a little too drawn out, almost musical in a way that made my stomach knot. I stepped into the living room slowly, scanning every corner. The light poured through the windows, spilling over the still unpacked boxes, and dust motes drifting lazily in the air. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing. The stack of boxes by the far wall had been moved. I knew they'd been flush against the wall the night before, but now they were pulled slightly forward. leaving just enough space for something to slip behind them. The laughter stopped the moment my foot touched the carpet. The silence afterward was worse. I approached the boxes slowly, my breath loud in my ears. I reached out and grabbed the edge of the top box, hesitating for a moment before sliding it aside. Nothing, just the bare wall behind them. My pulse was still pounding when I stepped back. I told myself it must have been the house settling, a draft shifting things. But deep down, I didn't believe that for a second. By the time I left for work, I was already questioning my sanity. The office was a relief. The chatter of coworkers, the clack of keyboards, the hum of the copy machine was a welcome contrast to the suffocating quiet of the house. But around mid-afternoon, I caught myself staring at the corner of the office floor where the shadows pooled just a little too darkly, my mind replaying that laughter over and over. When I got home that evening, I told myself I wouldn't react to anything strange. If I didn't feed it whatever it was, it might stop. I left the lights on in every room, played music, and went about unpacking. For a while it seemed to work, until I went to bed. It started with the sound of something brushing against the hallway wall, soft, deliberate, like small fingertips dragging along the wallpaper. Then came the footsteps, light, unsteady. They stopped right outside my bedroom door. I lay there, my heart hammering, my eyes fixed on the thin line of light beneath the door. Then a shadow fell across it. I didn't move. The shadow lingered for a few seconds, then bent lower, as though whoever or whatever it was had crouched down. To peer in through the gap, my throat went dry. I almost called out, almost demanded to know who was there, but something deep in my gut told me not to. Instead, I pulled the blanket over my head and lay frozen, every muscle tense. Eventually, the shadow shifted away. The footsteps retreated, fading into silence. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. By morning, I had decided I couldn't take much more of this. I was going to look into the history of the house. It didn't take long. A quick search online brought up a handful of articles, local news pieces, mostly buried in archives. The house had belonged to a family in the late 1980s. They'd had one child, a little girl named Emily. Emily had disappeared when she was 6 years old. The official story was that she'd wandered off while playing outside and was never found. But the articles mentioned neighbors whispering about strange noises in the house even after she was gone. Some claimed they'd seen her face in the windows at night. I shut the laptop and sat back, my mind spinning. I didn't know what to do with that information. I just knew one thing. The laughter, the shadow, the face in the corner, none of it had been in my head. It was Emily, and for some reason she hadn't left. The sound came again, that night-wet, shallow breaths, dragging in and out, as though whatever was making them was struggling to fill its lungs. I froze mid-step in the hallway, every nerve in my body straining toward the noise. It wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the walls. I pressed my ear against the faded wallpaper. For a moment, all I heard was the thud of my own heartbeat. Then there it was. Inhale, pause, exhale. Slow, deliberate, as though it was where I was listening. The hallway light flickered once. Who's there? My voice cracked on the last word. No answer, just the breathing. I backed away slowly, my bare feet making soft thuds against the old wooden floor. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but who would I even explain this to? Hey, my house has lungs now. I could already hear the disbelief in their voice. The smell of damp earth rolled into the hallway, pungent and wrong. My stomach churned. The breathing grew louder, as if it were crawling through the studs toward me. I retreated into my bedroom, shutting the door, but the walls here were thinner. The sound followed. It moved slowly, pacing me, sliding along the perimeter of the room. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my bed, clutching the lamp like it was a weapon, eyes fixed on the place where the wallpaper bulged just slightly, as if the plaster behind it wasn't solid. By morning, the bulge was gone. No breathing, no smell. The house was perfectly quiet, like nothing had happened. I decided to tear into the wall. It was the only way to prove, if only to myself, that I wasn't losing my mind. I started in the hallway. With a hammer, I chipped away at the plaster until chunks fell at my feet. Dust filled the air. The first layer revealed warped wooden, beams and rotted insulation, but behind that, something darker, a black, wet-looking surface that almost glistened. It wasn't wood, it wasn't stone. When I pressed it with my fingers, it felt warm. The moment my skin touched it, a sharp gasp echoed from inside the wall, so close it made me stumble backward. I dropped the hammer. Then something on the other side exhaled hot, fetid air rushing out through the hole I'd made, hitting me in the face like the breath of a living thing. I gagged and stumbled back into the opposite wall. From deep inside, a whisper slid, out with the breath. Not loud, but so close I felt it against my ear. "You're in me now." I ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, barefoot in the cold morning air, my hands trembling. My neighbors stared as I stood on the lawn, but I didn't care. I told myself I wouldn't go back in, not ever. But when the sun began to set, the idea of leaving the house in darkness without knowing what was inside felt worse. I went back in. The hole in the wall was gone. The plaster was smooth again, as though I'd never touched it. But my hammer was still lying in the hallway, and from somewhere deep in the walls. I heard it breathing again. The sound came again soft. Deliberate footsteps above me. I froze halfway across the living room, staring at the ceiling. My pulse felt like it was trying to escape my throat. I told myself it could be the old house settling. Wood expands, nails creak. It happens. But then came a slow drag, like someone sliding their foot along the floorboards, followed by a muffled thud. That wasn't the house. I grabbed the flashlight from the counter, my hand trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. The beam cut across the walls, landing on the attic pole. Cord, my mind screamed to call the police. My body didn't listen. One step at a time, I crossed to the cord. My fingers wrapped around it, slick with sweat. I pulled. The attic ladder unfolded with a groan, dust drifting down like old ash. A rush of cold air poured over me, carrying the faintest scent of damp earth and something metallic. I climbed. The flashlight beam caught the edges of old boxes, a cracked trunk, and torn insulation. My breath echoed in the tight space. Every shadow looked like it could move if I blinked. In the far corner, I saw it, a chair, facing the wall. Afraid. Rope dangled from the ceiling above it, not tied like a noose, but looped like someone had used it to. Hang something else? A bag? A curtain? I didn't want to imagine. But what made my stomach knot was the small, folded piece of paper sitting on the chair seat. I crossed the attic in slow, deliberate steps, the wood groaning beneath me. I reached for the paper. It had my name on the front. In my handwriting, I opened it. Inside were just 3 words: "Don't look down." The flashlight slipped from my grip, clattering onto the floor. The beam spun wildly, landing on the attic. Opening. Someone was standing at the bottom of the ladder. They weren't moving, just staring up at me. My mind went blank, like my thoughts had been cut off mid-sentence. I wanted to scream, to rush down and run, but my body was locked in place. The figure stepped back into darkness. I scrambled down, barely touching the rungs, hitting the living room floor hard. The flashlight was still upstairs, but I didn't care. I bolted for the front door, only to find it wide open. The night air poured in, along with that same faint smell from the attic. Across the street, under the sickly yellow glow of a streetlight, the figure stood. I could just make out the shape of a face, and my own eyes staring back at me. It smiled. And then, in my voice, it whispered from across the road, "Don't look down." The ground beneath me gave a faint, unnatural creak, as if something hollow was under the floor. I ran. I didn't care where. I didn't care if it was into the dark woods or the next town. I just ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. But now, every night since, I hear footsteps under my bed, slow, careful, dragging closer, And every morning I find another note in my handwriting, always the same 3 words. Don't look down. I didn't notice it right away. When you move into a new house, there's too much going on to pay attention to little things, boxes to unpack, furniture to arrange, utilities to set up. My first day here was a blur of cardboard, bubble wrap, and the smell of fresh paint. The realtor had called the place a hidden gem tucked in the quiet outskirts of town. I was drawn to it instantly. Arched doorways, tall windows, and a kind of old world charm that made it stand out from the sterile apartments I'd lived in before. But there was something about the mirrors. There weren't many, which I thought was odd for such a large house. One in the hallway, an oval one framed in tarnished silver. Another in the upstairs bathroom, square and plain. A small hand mirror in a drawer I found while unpacking. I didn't give it much thought until the first time I glanced at the hallway. Mirror. I was walking past with a box in my arms. Out of habit, I flicked my eyes toward it, expecting the flash of movement, my own reflection staring back. There was nothing. Just the dim hallway stretching endlessly behind me in the glass. I stopped in my tracks, heart thudding. I shifted the box, leaned in closer. The mirror was clear, not cracked or warped. I could see the walls, the floor, even the faint shadow of the chandelier overhead, but my body wasn't there. I laughed, nervously. Maybe the angle was weird. Maybe I was standing just out of sight. I stepped sideways, forward, back. No change. The hallway and the glass remained empty, like I'd already walked out of frame. I told myself I was tired, unpacking stress making me paranoid. I avoided that hallway mirror for the rest of the day. It didn't stop there. That night, I went to wash my hands in the upstairs bathroom. Steam from the shower still clung to the air, and the mirror was fogged over. I wiped it with my palm and froze. The bathroom was there in the glass, yes. The sink, the toothbrush I'd just set down, the hand towel hanging crookly. But where I should have been standing, there was only empty space. This time, I stepped back, my chest tightening. I waved my arms, nothing. The towel swayed slightly from where it touched it. Visible in the reflection, but the hands that had touched it weren't there. I backed away until my shoulder hit the doorframe. The sound of my own breath filled the small room. I don't know why, but I whispered into the mirror, "What the hell is wrong with you?" The glass stayed still, silent. I left the bathroom light on that night. The next morning, I avoided looking into any mirror at all. I brushed my teeth staring at the sink. I fixed my hair using my phone's camera. And every time I passed that hallway mirror, my stomach knotted. I thought about calling the realtor. What exactly does one say? Hi, yes, small issue. Mirrors don't reflect me. Is that a known defect? I could already hear her awkward silence. By midday, my curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed the small hand mirror I'd found in the drawer. My logic was that maybe, just maybe this, was all in my head. That a handheld portable mirror would show me something different. I sat on the couch, sunlight pouring through the tall windows, and lifted the mirror. Nothing. The room was reflected perfectly. The couch, the coffee table, the sunlight striping the rug. But no me, that's when I noticed something worse. In the far corner of the reflected room, just behind where the couch met the wall, something was moving. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but the shape was too solid, too deliberate. It shifted slightly, like someone leaning just far enough out of sight. I whipped my head around. The real room's corner was empty. My pulse pounded as I looked back into the mirror. The figure was gone. A cold ripple went down my spine. I didn't pick that mirror up again. By the time I'd finished unpacking the last box in the kitchen, the light outside had dimmed to a deep violet. The house creaked with that slow, aching sound old timber makes when it's settling for the night. It felt different now, as though something had shifted since I found the strange mirror upstairs. I told myself I was just tired, that the moving process had me on edge. But I still couldn't shake the image of that reflection, the absence of one staring back at me from the glass. The house had 4 mirrors in total. The large hallway one, the bathroom upstairs, a small oval one in the master bedroom, and that tall, freestanding mirror in the attic-like storage room. 3 of them showed me perfectly fine. Only that one refused. After making a cup of tea, I decided I'd go back up, just for a quick look, to prove to myself it had been some weird trick of the light. The stairs groaned under my weight as I climbed, the sound echoing in the stillness. The air on the second floor was noticeably cooler, as if someone had left a window open. I'd passed the bathroom, caught my reflection in the mirror above the sink, and almost laughed. There I was, flushed and tired but whole. But when I reached the narrow door at the end of the hall and stepped inside the storage room, the feeling returned. That invisible pressure in the air. The scent of something, faintly metallic. The mirror stood in the same place as before, a sliver of dim moonlight slipping through the curtainless window to illuminate its dusty frame. I stood directly in front of it. Nothing. The glass reflected the faint outline of the room behind. The boxes I hadn't unpacked yet, the half-rolled rug, the open window. But not me. A strange urge came over me. I reached out, pressing my fingertips to the glass. It was cold, so cold it felt like ice water soaking into my skin. And then something pressed back. It wasn't strong, just the faintest pressure, like the touch of another hand mirroring my own. I jerked back so fast I stumbled, knocking into one of the boxes. Its contents, a pile of old books, spilled across the floor. That's when I saw it. On the far side of the glass, for a split second, something moved. Not me, not anything human. Just a shifting shadow that seemed to curl and twist before melting back into the darkness of the reflection. I slammed the door shut behind me and hurried downstairs, my pulse hammering. I didn't go back up there that night. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping. It took me a moment to realize it was coming from upstairs. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, each tap, 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 vibrating faintly through the floorboards. It was too steady to be the house settling. Too deliberate. I sat up, straining to hear. The sound stopped. Just when I started to convince myself it was my imagination, it started again, louder this time. I slipped out of bed, grabbed my phone for light, and crept into the hallway. The air was cold enough to make my breath visible. The tapping was coming from the storage room. My hand trembled as I gripped the doorknob. I hesitated, then slowly turned it. The room was empty. The window was shut tight, but the mirror's surface rippled. Not like water, more like something beneath the glass was shifting, stretching, distorting the reflection of the room. And in that warped image, I saw movement again. A pale hand pressed flat against the inside of the glass. It wasn't mine. This time, I didn't run. I stood there, frozen, as the hand began to slide downward, leaving a faint, dark streak in its wake. I blinked, and the glass was still again. No hand, no streak. Just my unpacked boxes and the faint moonlight. I backed out slowly, shut the door, and locked it. But even from my bedroom, I swore I could still hear it tap. Tap, tap long. Into the night. The next morning, sunlight poured through the sheer curtains of my bedroom, but it felt cold, as if the glass filtered out any warmth. I didn't sleep much after what happened with the bathroom mirror, but I tried to convince myself it had been a trick of the light, some odd refraction I couldn't explain. Still, I avoided looking directly at any reflective surface while I dressed. The full-length mirror in the bedroom corner, covered with faded cloth when I moved in, stayed that way. I'd meant to uncover it, but now it felt safer hidden. By the time I went downstairs, I noticed something strange about the house in daylight. The air seemed heavier than it should be. Dust motes floated in the stillness, like suspended. Ash, refusing to drift down. And every time I walked past one of the mirrors, there were more than I realized. A framed oval in the hallway, a rectangular piece above the mantel. My eyes twitched toward them instinctively, but I resisted looking. It wasn't until after lunch, while unpacking in the living room, that my resolve cracked. The mantel mirror was old, beveled along the edges, the kind of thing you'd find in an antique shop. I was carrying a box of books, sweat dampening my collar, when movement caught my peripheral vision. I looked and froze. The reflection was of the room, yes, same couch, same mantle, but the figure in the reflection wasn't moving the way I was. I was standing still, but the version of me in the mirror was tilting its head, almost studying me. It's impossible to explain how wrong it felt, because it wasn't like seeing a stranger. It was me, same face, same shirt, but with subtle, deliberate differences. My reflected eyes didn't blink when I did. My mouth curved upward in the faintest smirk. I stepped forward, trembling, and the reflection didn't match my movement. Instead, it stepped back as if it didn't want me closer. Then, with horrifying clarity, it mouthed something I couldn't hear. A single word. I don't know why, but I was certain it was my name. The sound of a knock at the door made me flinch. My eyes darted away from the mirror, and when I looked back, my reflection was perfectly normal again. At the door stood an old woman, stooped, wrapped in a shawl, her skin the fragile paper-thin kind you get in your 80s or 90s. Her eyes were a cloudy gray, and she leaned on a crooked cane. "You moved in?" she said without greeting. "You shouldn't have." I opened my mouth to ask what she meant, but she was already shaking her head. "They don't like it when the glass is watched, they?" I asked. She glanced past me into the house, her gaze lingering on the mantel mirror. "Cover them," she whispered. "All of them. Don't let it see you too long." And then she turned and walked away, moving surprisingly fast for someone her age. The rest of the day, I did as she said. Sheets, blankets, even a few old towels, I draped them over every mirror I could find. My mind kept replaying that smirk, the slow head tilt, the unblinking eyes. That night, the house felt quieter than before. I sat in the living room reading, every light on. The covered mirrors were like blindfolded sentries along the walls. Around midnight, the cloth over the mantel mirror began to shift, slowly sliding down as though pulled from behind. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. When the cloth finally fell away, the mirror showed me sitting exactly as I was, except my reflection wasn't alone. Standing directly behind it, in the dim reflection's background, was another figure. It was taller than me. And smiling much, wider. By the next morning, my nerves were frayed to threads. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the mirror in the hallway. Not the empty glass, but the moment it shifted. The memory replayed in perfect clarity, like my brain refused to let it go. Sunlight filled the kitchen now, but even that warmth felt thin. The air in this house seemed to drink light until it became dull and lifeless. I tried to keep myself busy, making coffee, unpacking more boxes, setting up my bookshelves. But my eyes kept darting toward the hallway mirror. It stood there like an open mouth, ready to swallow my reflection again. By noon, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a blanket, walked over, and draped it over the frame. The fabric slid down, covering the glass completely. It should have made me feel better. It didn't. That night, I heard it again. The faintest, almost imperceptible sound. A dragging, like something heavy was sliding across wood. It was coming from the hallway. I told myself it was nothing, that old houses groaned and shifted. But when I peeked around the doorway, the blanket over the mirror was gone. It wasn't on the floor, Dot. It wasn't folded neatly somewhere, Dot. It was just gone. And the mirror? It was angled differently. It had been flush against the wall before, but now it was turned ever so slightly, facing the living room. My heart hammered in my chest. I didn't walk closer. I couldn't. I stood frozen, watching my empty reflection space, that void where I should have been. And then, from somewhere deep in the glass, I saw movement. Not mine, Dot, something behind where my reflection should be. I could only make out the shape for a second. A tall, shadowy figure, its head tilted slightly to one side. I blinked. It was gone, but the glass was still breathing. Not literally, but the way light warped across it made it seem as if it pulsed faintly, like it was alive. I slept in my car that night. The cold air was biting, but at least I knew. There were no mirrors around me. I kept glancing up at the house through the windshield, expecting to see someone or something in the window. At one point around 3 a.m., I did. A pale shape, standing in the upstairs bedroom, completely still. It wasn't me. The next morning, my neighbor, Mrs. Green, was watering her flowers. She was in her 60s, warm smile, friendly eyes. The kind of neighbor you'd expect to bake you cookies when you move in. "You're up early," she said, waving. I hesitated before answering. "Did you ever know the previous owners of this house?" Her smile faltered. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious." She looked at the house for a long moment, her lips tightening. "I think you should be careful with the mirrors in there." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "They don't show you, they show what's waiting for you." That night, I didn't even try to cover the mirror. I just sat in the armchair, watching it from the living room, waiting for something to happen. It didn't take long. The glass shimmered faintly, the air seemed heavier, thicker, and then I saw the shadow again, closer this time. It moved until it was almost pressed against the other side of the glass. I couldn't make out its face. It was like it had none, but its presence was suffocating. And then, for the first time, I saw a hand. Long, pale fingers pressed against glass. From the inside, the surface rippled like water. I didn't move, I couldn't. The fingers curled slightly, almost beckoning. And then, in the faintest whisper, so close it could have been inside my head, I heard, "Not yet." The silence. In the house felt heavier that night, pressing against my ears like cotton. I had locked every door, every window, and even shoved a chair under the doorknob to my bedroom. But I knew deep down that whatever was happening here wasn't coming from outside. It was inside. I sat cross-legged on the bed, flashlight in my lap, every muscle in my body tight as wire. The mirrors had been behaving strangely all day sometimes, flickering with shadows, sometimes just staying blank like the glass didn't know I was here. But an hour ago in the bathroom, I saw something that had nearly made me vomit. The mirror didn't just fail to reflect me, it reflected someone else. She had been standing where I should have been, her face a pale, dead-eyed version of mine. Her lips curled into the faintest smirk. She raised her hand and pressed it against the glass. And then her mouth moved slowly, like she wanted to make sure I understood every word. "You're in my place." I slammed the bathroom door and ran. Now, in my bedroom, I could feel the mirrors in the other rooms waiting for me. I swear I could hear the faintest tapping, like fingernails against glass, coming from the walls. The sound wasn't constant. It would start, stop, and then move, like someone walking from mirror to mirror. I thought about smashing them. I'd even gone to the kitchen earlier and pulled out the heaviest frying pan I could find. But when I approached the first mirror, the one in the hallway, my hands began to shake so badly I dropped the pan. The mirror surface rippled just once, like water disturbed by a stone. I didn't touch it again. At some point during the night, I must have dozed off with the flashlight still in my lap. When I woke, it was dead. The room was pitch black except for a faint glow coming from the corner. My heart thudded painfully as I realized it was the mirror. I didn't have a mirror in my bedroom, but there it was standing where my dresser should be, tall, old-fashioned, with a gilded frame and glass so clean it looked like liquid. I could see my reflection perfectly this time, standing there in my rumpled t-shirt and sweatpants, hair a mess, face pale, except I wasn't moving. The reflection tilted its head to the side, like a bird studying something. Then, slowly, it raised its hand, palm out, like it wanted me to do the same. I shook my head and whispered, "No." Its smile spread, too wide to be human. The tapping started again, faster now, dash tap, dash tap, dash tap, dash tap, like something trying to break through. My reflection's lips moved again, but I couldn't hear the words. I stumbled backward until I hit the wall. The mirror began to push forward, its surface bulging outward, like something was pressing from the other side. I grabbed the chair from the door and hurled it at the mirror. The crash was deafening. Shards of glass exploded across the room, glittering like ice. But instead of falling still, the pieces kept shifting, pulling together, sliding toward each other across the floor. They were reforming. The last thing I saw before sprinting out of the room was my own reflection, grinning at me from a mirror. That shouldn't exist anymore. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the house, sharp and violent, like ice splitting underfoot. I flinched and spun toward the bathroom doorway, my heart in my throat. I knew that sound. Another mirror had just broken, but not because I touched it. I stepped into the hall, my bare feet freezing against the wood, every nerve straining for. The next sound, the house was holding its breath again, that suffocating stillness pressing on my ears. Then came the whisper. It wasn't from inside my head this time, it slithered down the hallway like smoke. My name, drawn out, warped, and dripping with something almost amused. I didn't want to follow it. Every instinct screamed to get out, but my body betrayed me, dragging me toward the source, like a marionette with invisible strings. The sound led me to the largest mirror in the house, one I hadn't looked into yet. It stood in the upstairs guest room, framed in black wood, carved with strange symbols I couldn't name. It was unbroken. I froze in the doorway, staring. I could see the room reflected perfectly. The bed, the walls, the darkened hallway behind me, but my reflection was missing. Again. Except this time, something else was there. A figure stood in my place. It wore my face, but wrong its smile. It was too wide, the eyes too dark, and the skin too pale, like candle wax. Its movements were a fraction delayed, like a bad film reel, skipping frames. When it tilted its head, the delay caught up, snapping into sync. The sound it made wasn't from its mouth. It came from the glass itself, vibrating the air. Let me out. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the rug. My breath came in fast, shallow bursts, but my legs refused to carry me away. The figure in the mirror stepped forward, pressing its pale hands to the glass. The wood frame groaned, the symbol seeming to shift and twist like living things. "I've been waiting," it said, each word rippling through the surface like a stone dropped into water. "You're the one who moved in. You're the one who belongs here." I wanted to scream, but something deep inside me, a primal recognition, froze. Me in place? My instincts didn't just say run. They said you can't. The glass between us began to thin, the surface shimmering. A cold draft spilled into the room, smelling faintly of rot and old earth. The thing my mirror self pushed harder, and the surface bulged outward like stretched skin. The first crack appeared at the edge. That sound, that sharp, ice-breaking snap cut straight through my paralysis. I turned and bolted for the stairs, gripping the banister so hard my knuckles ached. Behind me, the glass shattered completely. I didn't look back, but I heard the sound of bare feet hitting the floor. Not running, walking, slowly. I tore through the house, slamming doors behind me, knowing it wouldn't matter. Every time I passed a mirror, the surface rippled, and the distorted version of me stared back with that hungry, patient smile. I made it to the front door, yanking it open, and froze. The porch was gone. In its place was nothing but darkness. Not night, not fog, just an endless void that seemed to pull at my vision. The wind, cold and sharp, carried whispers that sounded like dozens of voices overlapping, all saying the same thing. "You can't leave." Footsteps approached from behind, steady and certain. I turned, and it was there, my mirror self standing only a few feet away. No glass between us now. Its skin seemed more solid, its eyes impossibly deep, pulling me in. It reached out a hand, palm up, as if inviting me. "I can take your place," it said, the words vibrating in my bones. "You can rest. No more moving. No more running. Just step in." I shook my head, backing toward the door, even though there was nowhere to go. My heel touched the edge of the void, and my balance wavered. The thing's smile widened. "You already belong to me." Something cold touched my back soft, like fabric. I glanced over my shoulder. It was the surface of a mirror stretching across the doorway like liquid glass, and I was already halfway through it. The last thing I saw before it swallowed me. A hole was the other me stepping forward into the house, pulling the door shut behind them. Now I'm here, on the other side. The mirrors still don't show me because I'm not the one you'd see anymore.